The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 11,000 years. Its walls were made from the bones of a dead moon, polished until they shone like black glass. 12 seats rose in a circle round a central platform, each one carved to fit the body of a different species. Representatives from the oldest civilizations in the galaxy sat in those seats today, and they had gathered to pass judgment on the youngest. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone on the central platform. She was 63 years old, with gray hair pulled back from her face and eyes that had seen too much to show surprise anymore. She wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and she kept her hands clasped behind her back as she listened to the charges against her species. Humanity has proven itself unable to follow the laws of civilized space, said Counselor Thex of the Venori. His species looked like tall birds with fur, wings, and scales instead of feathers. His voice was high and sharp, like metal scraping against stone. In just 200 years, they have gone from primitive radio signals to faster-than-light travel. The speed of development is dangerous. It is unnatural. Elena said nothing. She had learned long ago that the Council did not want to hear humanity's defense. They had already made their decision before she walked into this chamber. Furthermore, continued Counselor Sen of the Delphori, a being that looked like a floating mass of tentacles wrapped around a glowing core. Humans have repeatedly ignored territorial boundaries. They have expanded into systems that were not assigned to them. They have made contact with pre-spaceflight species without Council permission. This, at least, was true. Humanity had found a dying civilization on a world called Kepler-4 to be. The Council's law said they should have reported it and waited for permission to help. Instead, human doctors had landed within hours and saved 3 million lives. The Council had been furious. The evidence is clear, said Counselor Mox of the Hegemony, the oldest and most powerful member of the Council. Mox's species had no name that human tongues could pronounce. They looked like trees made of metal, with branches that moved like fingers and roots that walked like legs. Humanity is not ready to be part of galactic civilization. Perhaps they never will be. Elena finally spoke. May I ask a question? The Council fell silent. Mox's branches rustled. You may. How long did it take your species to develop faster-than-light travel, Counselor Mox? The metal tree was still for a long moment. 14,000 years. And yours, Counselor Thex? The bird-like alien shifted on his seat. 8,000 years. Humanity did it into 100, Elena said. Is that our crime? That we learned too quickly? That we reached too far? Your crime, Mox said, and his voice was like wind through dead leaves, is that you are dangerous. You change too fast. You grow too hungry. The other species of this galaxy took thousands of years to become what they are. This gave them time to learn wisdom along with knowledge. Humanity has learned only knowledge. You are children playing with fire, and you will burn the galaxy if we do not stop you. Elena looked around the chamber at the 12 faces watching her. Some showed contempt, some showed fear. A few showed something that might have been pity. None showed mercy. What is your judgment? She asked. Banishment, Mox said. Humanity will withdraw all presence from Council space within 1 standard year. A boundary will be established around your territory. No Council species may cross this boundary, and no human may leave it. You will be contained until such time as the Council decides you have learned wisdom. And when might that be? When we decide. Perhaps in 1,000 years. Perhaps never. The other counselors pressed their voting symbols. 12 lights glowed red in the darkness of the chamber. The vote was unanimous. Elena stood very still as the judgment was recorded. She thought about Earth, about her home city of Sao Paulo, about the small apartment where she had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories, about the stars. Humanity had dreamed of reaching those stars for thousands of years. Now they were being told they could never touch them. But she did not beg. She did not cry. She did not threaten or plead or rage. We will remember this, she said. Her voice was calm and clear, not with hatred, but with clarity. Counselor Thex made a sound that might have been laughter. Remember all you wish. It will change nothing. Elena turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The year that followed was the hardest in human history. Colonies were abandoned. Research stations were packed up and shipped home. Trade agreements were dissolved overnight. Millions of humans who had built lives among the stars were forced to return to the cramped confines of human space. The boundary was established exactly as the Council had promised. It was not a physical wall, but something worse, a network of automated stations that would detect any human ship trying to leave and destroy it without warning. The Council called it the quarantine zone. Humans called it the cage. Elena spent that year traveling from world to world, helping to organize the withdrawal. She saw families torn apart as human partners were forced to separate from alien spouses. She saw children born in Council space who had never seen Earth crying as they were loaded onto transport ships. She saw the hope draining out of her species like blood from a wound. But she also saw something else. On a colony world called New Brisbane, she watched a group of engineers dismantling their research facility. They worked efficiently and without complaint, but there was something in their eyes that was not defeat. "Ambassador," one of them said when he noticed her watching, "what will we do now?" "We'll go home," she said. And then, Elena thought about it for a long moment. "Then we build," the engineer nodded slowly. "Build what?" "Everything. Everything we need to survive. Everything we need to grow. Everything we need to become something the Council never expected." The engineer smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "I'd like that." The last convoy crossed the boundary on the final day of the year. Elena stood on the observation deck of the transport ship Horizon, watching the stars of Council space fall away behind them. Her aide, a young man named Thomas, stood beside her. He was only 25, barely old enough to remember a time when humans were welcomed among the other species. "What do you think they'll do now?" he asked. "Forget about us, probably," Elena said. "That's what they want. They want us to fade away in our little cage. They want us to shrink and weaken until we're no threat to anyone, will we?" Elena turned away from the window. Her eyes were hard, but there was something burning behind them that Thomas had never seen before. "No," she said. "We won't shrink. We won't weaken. We won't fade away. Then what will we do?" Elena put her hand on the young man's shoulder. "We'll prove them wrong. Not by fighting them, not by hating them, but by becoming something greater than they ever imagined we could be." "How long will that take?" "As long as it takes. Maybe decades, maybe centuries. But we will remember this day, Thomas. Not the pain of it, but the lesson. The Council thinks they've buried us. They don't understand that they've just planted a seed." The ship crossed the boundary. Sensors detected the change, and a soft alarm chimed through the corridors. They were home now, locked inside their cage for perhaps the rest of human history. But as Elena walked toward her quarters, she passed crew members and passengers who did not look defeated. They looked determined. They looked like people who had been given a purpose. On Earth, the news of the banishment sparked protests at first. People burned effigies of the Council species in the streets. Politicians made angry speeches about revenge and war. But Elena appeared on every screen and spoke to her people. "They expect us to rage," she said. "They expect us to waste our energy on hatred. They are waiting for us to prove that we are exactly what they accused us of being: violent, aggressive, uncontrollable. We will not give them that satisfaction. What do we do instead?" A journalist asked. Elena looked directly into the camera. "We build, we grow, we become. And one day, when they need us, and they will need us, because that is the nature of the universe, we will show them what humanity really is." The protests faded. The anger cooled into something harder and more useful. Across human space, factories began to hum. Research laboratories lit up. Shipyards that had been half empty suddenly had waiting lists that stretched for years. Elena retired from the diplomatic corps and spent her remaining years teaching. She wrote books about what she had learned among the alien species. She gave lectures about the future she believed humanity could build. And she raised her son, Marcus, to understand that exile was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning. On the day she died, at the age of 91, her last words were to her grandson, a boy of 12 who would one day become one of the greatest engineers in human history. "Remember," she told him, "not with hatred, but with clarity." He never forgot, and neither did humanity. 50 years after the banishment, the boundary still stood. The automated stations floated in the darkness between stars, their sensors always watching. always ready to destroy any human ship that tried to escape. The Council had built them to last for centuries, and they worked exactly as designed. But inside the cage, something was changing. Marcus Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Titan Station, the largest shipyard in human space. He was 47 years old now, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's steady hands. Those hands had built ships for 3 decades, and the ship floating outside the window was his greatest achievement yet. The Prometheus was 5 kilometers long. Its hull was made from a new alloy that human scientists had invented after years of research. Its engines could cross 100 light years in a single jump. Its weapons were hidden inside its body like claws inside a cat's paw, ready to extend when needed. "She's beautiful," said Admiral Chen, who stood beside Marcus. "How many can you build?" 3 more are already in production. We'll have a fleet of 20 within 5 years. The Admiral nodded slowly. And the Council has no idea? Their sensors only watch the boundary. They've never tried to look inside. They assume we're still using the same technology we had when they locked us in. Marcus smiled. It was not a kind smile. They're wrong. The years of exile had not been wasted. With nothing to trade and no one to impress, humanity had turned all its energy inward. Scientists who had once competed for grants now worked together in massive research programs. Engineers who had built ships to Council specifications now invented entirely new designs. The old divisions between nations had faded as humanity realized it had become one tribe, alone in the darkness, and they had built wonders. Fusion reactors that produced more power than entire planets had used before the banishment. Computers that could think almost as fast as human minds. Medical technology that had doubled the human lifespan. Agricultural systems that could feed billions on barren rocks. But Marcus knew the greatest change was not in their technology. It was in their purpose. He thought about his grandmother often. Elena Vasquez had died when he was 12, but her words had shaped his entire life. Build, she had told them, and they had built. But not just machines. They had built a new kind of civilization, one that understood what truly mattered. The Council had cast humanity out because they feared human aggression. What they never understood was that human aggression was not a fixed thing. It could be channeled, directed, transformed. The same fire that burned cities could warm homes. The same hands that wielded weapons could build bridges. Humanity had learned to choose what it wanted to be. 3 months after the Prometheus was completed, a small ship appeared at the edge of human space. It was not a Council vessel. Its design was strange, crystalline, like a snowflake made of glass. Marcus was called to the first contact chamber on Earth's orbital station. He arrived to find a team of scientists already analyzing the signal the ship was broadcasting. "They're calling themselves the Veth," said Dr. Sarah Wong, the lead xenobiologist. "They're asking for asylum." Asylum from what? From the Council. Apparently, they were banished too. About 300 years ago. Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. There are others? At least 3 species, according to their transmission. The Veth, the Mirai, and the Crix, all banished. All forced to live beyond the boundaries of Council space. The Veth ship was allowed to land. Its passengers looked like living crystals. Humanoid in shape, but made of translucent material that caught the light and split it into rainbows. Their leader was called Chorus, and she spoke through a translator device that turned her species' musical language into words. "We detected your energy signatures 50 years ago," Chorus said. "We watched you grow. We waited to see what you would become." Marcus stood across from her in the meeting hall. Beside him were representatives from every major human government and organization. "And what have we become?" he asked. "Strong," Chorus said, "but not cruel. This is rare among the banished." The Mirai became raiders for a time, attacking Council shipping lanes until they were nearly destroyed. The Crix turned on each other and fought civil wars for a century. "Only you have grown without becoming monsters. We had good teachers," Marcus said. "Ancestors who reminded us to build rather than destroy." Chorus made a sound like wind chimes. The translator said it meant appreciation. "We wish to trade with you, to share what we know. Perhaps, in time, to build something together." The Council of Nations voted unanimously to accept the Veth proposal. Within a year, Veth crystal technology was being integrated into human ships, making them faster and more efficient. Human agricultural science was helping the Veth grow food on worlds they had never been able to cultivate before. Then the Morai came. They were amphibious beings, with smooth skin that changed color with their emotions and large, dark eyes that saw in spectrums humans could barely imagine. They had been pirates once, Chorus had said, but their piracy had been born from desperation rather than greed. Their leader, Admiral Koss, was old and scarred. He had fought the Council for decades before accepting that victory was impossible. "We heard you took in the Veth," he said, standing before the Human Council. "We wondered if you might take us into." "What do you offer?" asked President Martinez. "Ships, warriors, knowledge of Council tactics and weaknesses. We fought them for 100 years. We know their strengths and their fears. We're not looking for war," Marcus said. "We're building something new." Koss's skin shifted to a deep blue. "Then teach us how to build instead of destroy. We are tired of fighting. We are tired of running. We want something better." The Morai joined the growing alliance. Their ships were converted from weapons of war to vessels of trade and exploration. Their warriors became security forces, protecting the shipping lanes between the allied species. Last came the Cricks. They were insectoid beings, with hard shells and compound eyes and voices that buzzed like swarms of bees. They had been shattered by their civil wars, reduced to a handful of survivors living on dying ships. They did not ask for alliance. They asked for mercy. "Let us serve," said their spokesperson, a being called Hive Voice. "We have nothing left to offer but our labor. Let us work for you. Let us earn a place among you." Marcus looked at the desperate creatures before him. They were thin, their shells cracked, their eyes dull with exhaustion. The Council had thrown them away like garbage, and 300 years of isolation had almost finished what banishment had begun. He thought about what his grandmother would do. "You don't need to serve," he said. "You need to heal. We'll give you worlds to rebuild on. We'll give you food and medicine and time. And when you're ready, if you want to join us as equals, you'll be welcome." Hive Voice made a sound that the translator could not interpret, but Marcus understood it anyway. It was the sound of hope returning to a species that had forgotten what hope felt like. The alliance grew. For species, all cast out by the Council, all learning to work together. They called themselves the Horizon Compact, because they were all reaching toward a future they could not yet see but believed in anyway. 80 years after the banishment, Marcus Vasquez died. He was 97 years old, surrounded by his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. His final project, a network of stations that would allow instant communication across the entire compact, was completed 3 days before his death. His great-grandson, Carlos, was 22 years old. He had already graduated from the Fleet Academy and been assigned to his first ship. He sat beside the old man's bed and held his hand. "Are you afraid?" Carlos asked. "No," Marcus said. "I got to see so much. The Prometheus, the Veth Alliance, the Compact. Your grandmother used to say that exile was a gift, even though it didn't feel like one. She was right. What happens now?" Marcus smiled. His eyes were dim, but there was still fire behind them. "Now you keep building. The Compact is strong, but it's not finished yet. There's still so much to do. And someday, I think, the Council will need us. When that day comes, I want you to remember something." "What?" "Remember that we don't help them to prove we're better than they are. We help them because that's who we chose to be. The Council thought they were punishing us when they locked us away. They didn't understand that they were setting us free." Carlos nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. He was young. He had never seen Council space, never met an alien who looked at humans with fear and contempt. He only knew the Compact, the alliance of outcasts who had become family. But he would understand someday, when the darkness came, and the Council screamed for help, and humanity had to choose what kind of species it wanted to be. That day was coming. The sensors had already detected something moving in the deep void at the galaxy's edge. Something that was not alive in the way most things were alive. Something that consumed everything it touched. The Hollow was waking up, and soon everyone would learn what the Banished had become. The Hollow came from the darkness between galaxies. No one knew where it had originated. Some council scientists theorized it was the remnant of a dead civilization, machines left behind when their creators perished. Others believed it was something older, something that had existed since the beginning of the universe, waiting in the void for prey to find. What everyone agreed on was that it was hungry. Counselor Thex was 300 years old when the first Hollow Swarm entered council space. He had been a young diplomat when humanity was banished, and he still remembered the human ambassador's face as she accepted the judgment. He had laughed at her words then. "We will remember this," as if remembering would change anything. Now he stood in the council chamber and watched the tactical display as 3 worlds burned. The Hollow moved like a flood of metal insects. Each unit was small, no larger than a human fist, but there were billions of them. They swarmed over planets and stripped them bare, consuming everything: rock, water, air, flesh. When they were finished, nothing remained but dust, and they were learning. The first council fleet to engage the Hollow had been destroyed in hours. The second fleet had lasted slightly longer before being overwhelmed. The third fleet had retreated before contact, its admiral declaring that conventional tactics were useless. "What do we do?" asked Counselor Sen, the Delphori representative. His tentacles writhed with anxiety. "We cannot fight them. We cannot negotiate with them. They do not respond to any communication. We run," said Counselor Mox. The ancient metal tree had not moved from his seat in decades, but his branches trembled now. "We evacuate the outer worlds and fall back toward the core. Perhaps they will slow. Perhaps they will stop." "They will not stop," said a new voice. Everyone turned. A junior aide from the intelligence division stood at the entrance to the chamber. She was Venori, like Thex, but young, barely a century old. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, "but there is something the council must see." She activated a holographic display. It showed the galaxy from above, with council space marked in blue and the Hollow's advance marked in red. The red was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. But there was another color on the map. Beyond the boundary that separated the council from the species it had banished, there was green. Lots of green. "What is this?" Vex demanded. "The quarantine zone," the aide said. "We have been monitoring it passively for 80 years, as protocol requires. For most of that time, we detected only minimal activity. We assumed the banished species were declining as expected. And now we are detecting energy signatures that exceed anything in council space. Shipyards producing vessels at rates we cannot match. Populations growing on worlds we considered uninhabitable. Military installations that our sensors can barely classify." The chamber fell silent. "That is impossible," Mox said finally. Humanity was a young species. Even with the other banished races, they could not have developed so quickly. "The data does not lie," the aide said. "Whatever is happening beyond the boundary, it is not what we expected. They have become something we do not understand." Vex stared at the map. The green zone was larger than he had imagined. It covered dozens of systems, maybe hundreds. And at its heart, in the system where humanity's homeworld orbited its yellow sun, the energy readings were off the scale. "Can they help us?" Counselor Sen asked. "We banished them," Mox said. "We locked them in a cage for 80 years. Why would they help us?" "Because if they do not, the Hollow will eventually reach them too. We do not know that. The Hollow has shown no interest in the boundary zone. Perhaps it will ignore them. Or perhaps," Vex said slowly, "they know something we do not. Perhaps they have been watching the Hollow too. Perhaps they are already preparing." The council debated for 3 days while another world fell. Some argued for sending an envoy to the boundary, asking for assistance. Others insisted that accepting help from the banished would be a humiliation. The council could not survive. A few suggested that the situation was not as bad as it seemed, that council forces would eventually adapt and find a way to defeat the Hollow. On the 4th day, a Hollow swarm reached the homeworld of the Delphori. Counselor Sen was not there. He had left for the core worlds months ago, fleeing the advance. But billions of his people remained, those who could not afford passage on the evacuation ships, those who refused to leave their ancestral waters. They died in hours. The council watched the footage in horrified silence. The swarm descended on the ocean world like a silver rain. It drained the seas. It consumed the cities. It stripped the atmosphere until nothing remained but a gray, dead rock. "Send the signal," Mox said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Ask them for help." The message was transmitted through the boundary stations, those same stations that had been built to keep humanity imprisoned. It was a simple message, broadcast on all frequencies. "We need assistance. The hollow is destroying us. Please respond." For 2 days, there was no answer. Then, on the 3rd day, a reply came. It was brief and unsigned. "We have been watching. We are coming." On a station at the edge of human space, Admiral Carlos Vasquez stood before the Compact Council. He was 52 years old now, with gray at his temples and the weight of command in his eyes. His great-great-grandmother's portrait hung on the wall behind him, a reminder of where his family had begun. The council was larger than it had been in his grandfather's time. Representatives from 7 species sat around the circular table: humans, Veth, Morai, Crix, and 3 newer members who had found their way to the Compact in recent decades. They had been watching the Hollows advance for 5 years, ever since their long-range sensors had detected the first attack. "They are asking for our help," said Chorus, the Veth representative. She was the granddaughter of the Chorus who had first contacted humanity, and she shared her grandmother's musical voice. "The question is whether we should give it. They imprisoned us," said Admiral Koss, now ancient and slow but still sharp of mind. "They left us to rot in the darkness. Let them face the consequences of their arrogance." "I understand your anger," Carlos said. "I share it. My grandmother was forced to watch her people humiliated and caged. My grandfather spent his entire life building a civilization that the council said we could never create. They were wrong about us, and their judgment caused immeasurable pain." "Then why are we even discussing this?" asked Hive Voice, the Crix representative. "Because if we do not help them, we become what they accused us of being." The chamber went quiet. Carlos stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars of compact space glittered in the darkness. Those stars represented hope for species that had been thrown away by a galaxy that did not want them. "The council called humanity dangerous," he said. "They said we were aggressive, uncontrollable, a threat to galactic civilization. And maybe they were right. Maybe there is something in us that frightens other species. Something fierce, something hungry." He turned back to face the council. "But we chose what to do with that fire. We built instead of destroyed. We welcomed the Veth when they came to us. We healed the Morai instead of using them. We gave the Crix a chance to rebuild when anyone else would have let them die. We became something better than what the council feared. And now," Chorus asked, "now we have a chance to prove it. Not to the council they do not matter. To ourselves, to our children, to the universe that is watching to see what we will do." Koss made a sound that might have been a sigh. "You are asking us to save the people who tried to destroy us. I am asking us to be the people we want to be. We can let them burn and watch from the safety of our borders. Or we can cross the boundary and show them that they were wrong. That humanity is not a threat to be contained. That we are something much more than they ever imagined." The vote was not unanimous. Koss abstained, unable to bring himself to support helping the council, but unwilling to condemn his allies to inaction. The 3 newer species voted with hesitation, uncertain of what they were agreeing to, but the majority voted yes. The Horizon Compact would go to war. On the day the fleet departed, Carlos stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Prometheus 3. It was the 3rd ship to bear that name, and it was more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its weapons could crack planets. Its shields could withstand the concentrated fire of a council armada. But Carlos hoped he would not need any of that power for destruction. He hoped he would need it for something better. "Set course for the boundary," he ordered. All ships, 1,000 vessels, turned toward the darkness. The cage was about to open. The boundary stations detected the fleet before it arrived. Their automated systems sent warnings to Council Command, reporting a massive movement of ships toward the quarantine zone. For a moment, there was confusion. Was this an invasion? Had the Banished finally decided to take revenge for their imprisonment? Then the fleet crossed the boundary, and the stations did not fire. They could not. Human engineers had been studying the boundary for decades, learning its weaknesses, preparing for a day that might never come. When the time arrived, Cracking the station's protocols took less than 10 minutes. Admiral Carlos Vasquez watched through the viewport as his fleet entered Council space. For the first time in 80 years, the stars looked the same. The darkness between them was just as cold and empty. But everything was different now. "All ships report ready," said his tactical officer, Commander Jin Park. "No Council vessels in range. Long-range sensors show hollow activity near the Venori homeworld." "How far?" 3 days at maximum speed. Carlos nodded. "Set course. Tell the fleet we're going to introduce ourselves." The Council had evacuated most of the Venori system, but millions of people remained. They were the poor, the sick, the stubborn, those who could not or would not leave their homes. They had watched the hollow consume world after world, always moving closer, always hungry. They had made their peace with death. When the human fleet arrived, they thought the end had finally come. General Veth of the Venori Defense Force was 350 years old. He had been a young soldier when humanity was banished, and he remembered the celebrations afterward. The dangerous species was gone. The galaxy was safe. They could all sleep peacefully now. Now he stood in his command center and watched 1,000 unknown ships fill his sensors. "They are not hollow," his aide reported, voice trembling. "The energy signatures are wrong." "They are. I do not understand these readings. Can you identify them?" "They match nothing in our database. But there is something." The aide's feathers went pale. "General, some of these ships have human markings." Veth felt his heart stop. Human. The species they had caged. The species they had feared. And now they were here, with a fleet larger than anything the Council had ever built. "They are hailing us," the aide said. On screen, the face that appeared was human. Male, middle-aged, with gray at his temples and calm, dark eyes. He wore a uniform that Veth did not recognize, covered in symbols from species that Veth had never seen. "General Veth," the human said. "I am Admiral Carlos Vasquez of the Horizon Compact. We received your Council's distress signal. We are here to help." Veth could not speak. Behind him, his staff stared at the screen in shock. "We understand that our arrival is unexpected," Carlos continued. "We have no intention of harming your people or claiming your territory. We are here to fight the hollow. Nothing else." "Why?" Veth finally managed to ask. "We banished you. We caged you. We treated you like animals. Why would you help us?" Carlos smiled, and there was something in that smile that Veth did not expect. Not hatred, not triumph. Something softer, because that is who we chose to be. The hollow arrived 2 days later. The swarm that descended on the Venori system was the largest, yet billions upon billions of metal insects moving as one. A silver tide that blotted out the stars. Council defenders who had fought the hollow before began to retreat before contact, their ships screaming warnings of inevitable defeat. Then the compact fleet engaged. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was the most violent conflict the galaxy had seen in millennia. Human weapons tore through hollow formations with efficiency that Council observers could not explain. Veth crystal ships refracted the swarm's communications, disrupting their coordination. Mirai raiders struck from unexpected angles, drawing portions of the swarm away from the main defense. Crick's engineering teams repaired damaged vessels in the middle of combat, keeping ships fighting that should have been debris. And slowly, impossibly, the hollow began to fall back. General Veth watched from his command center as the tide turned. Council officers stood around him, silent with disbelief. They had been preparing to die. Now they were watching the enemy that had destroyed a dozen worlds being pushed back by species. The Council had tried to forget. "How is this possible?" asked his aide. Veth shook his head. They had 80 years. 80 years with no one watching them, no one telling them what they could not do. They built something we never imagined. By the time the battle ended, the hollow had retreated from the system entirely. The Venori homeworld was saved. Millions of people who had expected to die were still alive. Admiral Vasquez declined General Veth's invitation to meet in person. "We have other worlds to reach," he explained over the communication channel. "The hollow is still advancing on multiple fronts. We cannot rest. What do you want from us?" Veth asked. "Nothing. We came because help was needed. That is all. But surely there must be something. Compensation, territory, political concessions." Carlos's face softened. "General, I understand why you expect us to want something. The Council has always worked that way, favors given, favors owed, power traded back and forth. But that is not who we are. We spent 80 years learning a different way to live. Help freely given, trust freely earned. No calculations, no debts. I do not understand. You will. When this is over, come to compact space. See what we have built. Then you will understand. The liberation of the Venori system was just the beginning." Over the following months, the compact fleet moved from system to system, engaging hollow swarms wherever they found them. Council worlds that had been written off as lost were reclaimed. Species that had fled to the galactic core found themselves able to return home. And everywhere the compact went, they asked for nothing in return. This confused the Council more than the military victories. They understood power. They understood trade. They understood the careful exchange of obligations that had governed galactic politics for thousands of years. What they did not understand was generosity without expectation. Some Council members accepted it gratefully. Others were suspicious, waiting for the trick, the hidden demand. A few whispered that humanity was playing a longer game, that they were building influence to seize control when the war was over. Councillor Thex was among those who traveled to the front lines to observe. He was ancient now, his feathers faded to gray, but his mind was still sharp. He watched the compact forces in battle. He spoke with human officers and their alien allies. He tried to understand what he was seeing. "You genuinely expect nothing," he said to Carlos during one brief meeting. "It is not a strategy. You truly came to help without wanting anything back. That is correct. Why?" Carlos considered the question. He had been asked it many times now, by many different species. He still did not have a perfect answer. "My great-great-grandmother was the last human ambassador to the Council," he said finally. "When she was banished, she said that humanity would remember what happened. Not with hatred, but with clarity. Do you know what she meant? I assume she meant that you would return one day for revenge. That is what the Council assumed. But that is not what she meant. She meant that we would remember clearly who we were and who we wanted to become. The Council thought they were punishing us. In truth, they were freeing us from a galaxy that would have corrupted us. We could have become like you, calculating, suspicious, always trading favors. Instead, we became something else." "What?" Carlos smiled. "I cannot tell you. You have to see it for yourself." Vex returned to the Council with a report that his colleagues did not want to hear. The Compact was not planning to conquer them. The humans were not waiting to demand payment for their assistance. They were exactly what they appeared to be, a civilization that had chosen to help. Because help was needed. The Council debated for days. Some wanted to believe Vex. Others could not let go of their suspicions. A few argued that even if the Compact was sincere now, they could not be trusted in the long term. In the end, it did not matter what the Council believed. The war was not over. The Hollow was still advancing on the galactic rim, building more swarms, learning from each defeat. Sooner or later, there would have to be a final battle, and humanity would lead it. On the day the compact fleet departed for the rim, Carlos stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the stars that had once been forbidden to his people. Those stars were open now. The boundary was gone. Humanity could go anywhere. But first, they had a war to end. "Set course for the rim," he ordered. All ships, the fleet turned toward the darkness where the Hollow was born. Whatever waited there, they would face it together. The edge of the galaxy was a place of darkness and cold. No stars burned here. No worlds orbited in the void. There was only the endless black, stretching out toward the other galaxies that flickered in the distance, like candles in an infinite night. And at the heart of that darkness, the Hollow had built its home. Admiral Carlos Vasquez stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the structure filling his view screen. It was enormous, larger than a planet, larger than a star. It looked like a nest made of metal, a tangled mass of machinery that pulsed with cold light. This was where the Hollow swarms were born. This was the mind that controlled them all. "Energy readings are off the scale," reported Commander Park. "Whatever that thing is, it has been building for a very long time." "How long?" "Millions of years, possibly. The metallic structure is ancient. It may have been here since before any of our species existed." Carlos nodded slowly. The Compact had theorized that the Hollow was a remnant of some long-dead civilization, machines left behind when their creators vanished. Looking at the massive structure before him, that theory seemed correct. Somewhere in the distant past, someone had built this factory mind to harvest resources, and then they had disappeared, leaving their creation to drift alone in the darkness for eons, until it woke up and decided to start harvesting again. "The fleet is in position," said his communications officer. "All compact vessels ready. Council auxiliaries standing by." Carlos looked at the tactical display. 1,000 compact ships formed the core of the attack force, the finest vessels humanity and its allies had ever built. Behind them, 300 Council ships waited, volunteers who had joined the mission despite their leaders' hesitation. It was a strange alliance, the Banished and the Banishers fighting side by side. But war made strange allies. "Open a channel to all ships," Carlos said. "Channel open." He took a breath. Around him, his bridge crew waited. Behind him, the combined fleet waited. And before him, the darkness waited too. "This is Admiral Vasquez to all vessels. 80 years ago, humanity was cast out of galactic civilization. We were called dangerous. We were called uncontrollable. We were locked in a cage and told to fade away. But we did not fade. We built, we grew. We became something the Council never expected. Today, we stand at the edge of the galaxy, ready to face the greatest threat our civilization has ever known. We do not fight for revenge. We do not fight for conquest. We fight because that is who we chose to be. When this is over, whatever happens, know that you are part of something greater than any of us. Today, we prove what the Banished can become." He closed the channel. "All ships," he said. "Attack." The battle for the galaxy began. Hollow swarms poured from the factory mind like water from a broken dam. Billions of metal insects swarmed toward the fleet, their coordinated movements turning them into a single massive weapon. Council officers who had survived earlier battles felt their courage waver. This was more than they had ever faced. This was the full power of the Hollow, unleashed at last. But the Compact did not waver. Human ships led the charge, their weapons blazing with fire that tore through swarm formations. Veth crystal vessels created interference patterns that disrupted Hollow coordination, turning the swarms from precise formations into chaotic clouds. Morai raiders struck from all angles, drawing portions of the enemy away from the main assault. Crick's engineering teams worked frantically to repair damage as it happened, keeping ships in the fight long past the point when they should have fallen. And slowly, meter by meter, the fleet advanced toward the factory mind. The cost was terrible. Ships died in flashes of light, their crews sacrificed to buy distance. Compact vessels, Council vessels, old enemies and new allies fell together in the darkness between stars. Carlos watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen and forced himself to keep commanding. This was the price. This was what it cost to save a galaxy. 3 hours into the battle, the fleet reached striking distance of the factory mind. The structure's defenses were immense weapons that could destroy stars, shields that could withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets. Direct assault was impossible, but the Compact had not come to attack directly. "Strike teams are ready," Commander Park reported. Carlos nodded. "Launch." 20 small vessels broke from the main fleet and raced toward the factory mind. They were too small for the structure's weapons to target efficiently, too fast for the swarms to intercept. Inside each vessel was a team of specialists, human, Veth, Morai. Crick strained for this single mission. Carlos's daughter, Captain Maya Vasquez, commanded the lead vessel. "We're through the outer defenses," she reported. "Moving to breach point." Acknowledged. "Good luck." The strike teams cut through the factory mind's hull and entered its depths. What they found inside was a nightmare of machinery and purpose corridors that stretched for kilometers. Chambers filled with half-built swarm units, conduits carrying energy from some unknown source at the structure's core. And everywhere, defenses. The Hollow had never faced an assault on its home before. It did not understand what the small creatures moving through its body were trying to do, but it knew they were threats, and it responded with everything it had. Maya lost 3 teams in the first 10 minutes. The corridors became death traps, filled with swarms that emerged from every surface. She pushed forward anyway, following the energy signatures toward the heart of the structure. Her team reached the core chamber after an hour of fighting. By then, only 7 of them remained, 3 humans, to Veth, 1 Mirai, 1 Crix. They stood in a room the size of a small city, looking at a sphere of pure energy that pulsed in the darkness. "That is the mind," said Chorus, the Veth specialist. "Destroy it, and the swarms will die." "Can we destroy it?" "I do not know, but we can try." The charges were planted. The team retreated, fighting through corridors that were now filled with desperate defenders. The Hollow had finally understood the threat, and it was throwing everything at them. Maya reached her vessel with 3 people left, herself, Chorus, and the Crix engineer called Needle. "Charges set," she reported to the fleet. "Detonating in 10 seconds. Acknowledged," her father replied. His voice was steady, but she could hear the fear underneath. "Get clear, we're trying." The charges detonated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the factory mind shuddered. Light blazed from its core, brighter than any star. Cracks spread across its surface, and energy poured out in waves that destroyed everything they touched. Maya's vessel was caught in the edge of the blast. Systems failed. The hull cracked. She felt herself thrown against the bulkhead as the ship tumbled out of control. Then darkness. She woke in a medical bay, surrounded by concerned faces. "The mission?" she asked. Her father was there. He was smiling, but there were tears on his cheeks. "The factory mind is destroyed. The swarms are dead. The Hollow is finished." Maya closed her eyes. They had won. The aftermath of the battle was a time of mourning and celebration. Mourning for the ships that had been lost, the lives that had been spent. Nearly half the compact fleet had been destroyed. A third of the council volunteers had fallen. Thousands of beings who had sailed into the darkness would never sail home. But celebration too. The galaxy was saved. The threat that had consumed a dozen worlds and driven entire species to extinction was gone. For the first time in years, people could look at the stars without fear. The council called for a summit. It was held on Nexus Prime, in the same chamber where humanity had been banished 80 years before. The walls were cracked now, damaged by a hollow swarm that had reached the station months earlier. But the 12 seats still stood, and representatives of all the council species still sat in them. Admiral Carlos Vasquez stood on the central platform, exactly where his great-great-grandmother had stood so long ago. But he was not alone. Behind him stood representatives of every compact species, Veth, Mirai, Crix, and the others who had joined the Alliance over the decades. Councillor Mox spoke first. The ancient metal tree was even older now, his branches barely moving. His voice reduced to a whisper. "We owe you our existence. The Banished have saved the Banishers. It is a debt we can never repay." "We do not want repayment," Carlos said. "We never did. Then what do you want?" Carlos looked around the chamber. He saw faces that had once looked on humanity with contempt and fear. He saw species that had voted to lock his people away forever. He saw centuries of arrogance and suspicion written in every expression. And he felt no anger, only hope. "We want a new beginning, not just for humanity, for everyone." The council failed because it was built on fear. Species were judged. Species were banished. Differences were punished instead of embraced. "We want something better." "What are you proposing?" "A new assembly, open to all species, banished and privileged alike, where no one is cast out, where strength means responsibility, where we build together instead of apart." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Councillor Thex rose from his seat. The ancient Venori walked slowly to the platform and stood beside Carlos.